This is a little bit of a different situation with Chris Paul, seeing that he's aging and he has an opt-in potentially, or he could maybe opt out and resign to a longer deal. Which direction do you think he's going to go with the Phoenix Suns?
I think he's more likely to opt out of the $44.2 million number row. And the thing I'm looking at is, again, about 90 to 100 million over a 3-year deal. And I think what the team would prefer to do is have that contract decline. And here's why. They have a couple young studs who are up for contract extensions in the 2018 draft class, DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges. Those wouldn't kick in till next offseason row in 2022. So the Suns can decline Chris Paul's contract by 8% a year. So if they started high and then walk it down, that gives them a little more wiggle room and a little more flexibility. You see here what he could sign for, and the numbers are astronomical, going north of $50 million 3 years from now. I don't think Chris Paul nor the organization expect that. I think the expectation in Phoenix is that he opts out of $44.2 million and they come up with a fair 3-year deal. Again, I think the break-even's right in the $90 to $100 million range. I think if the Suns give that to him, he stays. If not, we've talked about a lot of the teams that have interest in free agent point guards, especially the point guard, the Knicks, the Mavericks, and others. But my guess is he declines the option and stays in Phoenix in that $30 million a year range.
And we'll just play devil's advocate for a second because you mentioned the New York Knicks. Leon Rose one time represented Chris Paul, so that could be an option. Maybe a team like the Utah Jazz, maybe they say, you know, maybe we cut the head off the snake of one of our main competitors and bring him in. If there's any other team, who would Chris Paul fit best with?
Well, I think at this stage in his career, he wants to play for a contender. One other important thing to keep in mind, Ro, with Chris Paul, he's the president of the Players Association. So I don't think he's ever wanted to take less money to set that precedent for a future Hall of Famer, one of the best players, to take a discount for how that would look with the rest of his membership. So expect Chris Paul to get paid. Again, I think it will be with the Suns, but you talked about the Knicks and the relationship with Leon Rose and CAA. They're trying to be a contending team. The Dallas Mavericks, what a fit he'd be with Luka Doncic as a secondary playmaker. And then, as we know, the New Orleans Pelicans need a high-level playmaker as well. They have their eyes on Lowry. If you like Lowry, you probably also like Paul as well. So there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of dollars to be allotted to elite free agents, and there's nobody better than the point guard, Chris Paul.
No question about it. When you look at the other acquisitions that have been made, you have Landry Shamet, who comes in from the Brooklyn Nets. They make this draft day trade. Like, break this down. Why is, obviously we know that he can play, he can score. However, what other ways is this important, bringing him into the fold?
Financially, it's important. I mentioned the Suns' payroll is about to skyrocket a year from now when the extensions or new contracts, if they don't sign extensions, for DeAndre Ayton, who I think is a max player, and Mikal Bridges, who probably gets north of $20 million a year in free agency. When those kick in, when you're paying Devin Booker and Chris Paul $30+ million a year, Ayton in that range, again, Bridges $20 million, and then you have key contributors like Jay Crowder at $10, Dario Saric in the $8-9 million range, who's out for the year with a torn ACL. The payroll just skyrockets, Ro. So what the Suns did on draft night, they traded two pieces. Javon Carter, whose money went into next year as well, and the 29th pick in the draft, who would obviously be on a 4-year deal in the rookie scale, for Landry Shamet, who's in the last year of his deal. Shamet gives them bench shooting. He's also eligible for an extension. My guess is they don't do one with him and let him hit restricted free agency next year. So the Suns got a player who can help him now as they try to get back to the NBA Finals and contend for a championship. But they also give himself some more financial flexibility when the payroll skyrockets in 2022.
I was looking through my notes and I couldn't find it in there. DeAndre Ayton, who drafted that guy?
Oh, yeah, that was me.
It was you. That's right. You know what? Yeah, it was you that drafted DeAndre Ayton. So go ahead, brush your shoulders off one time. Excellent decision made. Obviously, we know that he took a ginormous leap this postseason. His development, I mean, obviously, he's going to command a very large number moving forward.
I think he's a max player or a near max player. The way this works on the rookie scale, Row, between years 3 and 4, and the Suns have 2 players in this position, DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges. The Suns can do an extension anytime from when free agency starts on August 2nd until the night before the regular season starts in mid-October. So other players in this draft class, like Luka Doncic and Trae Young, are in the same position. Now, the Suns have 2 guys, again, who will get well north of $50 million a year between Ayton and Bridges. Did they pay one of them now? Do they pay both of them now? Do they let it roll over until free agency next year? They have a lot of options, but it's a good problem to have when you have young players. We did it in 2018 with Devin Booker as a max player. They may do it again with Ayton at the max level and with Bridges at a high level as well.
Oh, okay. And you drafted Bridges also, correct?
It was a draft night trade, but yeah, we acquired him from Philly on draft night, and those are the only 3 guys left. I'm happy to see him doing so well.
Only 3 guys, and the third is?
Devin Booker, who's currently in Tokyo.
Devin Booker, who is a all-league player who dropped multiple 40-point games. This guy absolutely knows what he's talking about, just in case you don't know. Devin Booker, is he eligible for a new contract anytime soon? He's
actually up for an extension, but I don't think he's going to sign it, Ro. He's going to try to make All-NBA would be my guess. If he makes All-NBA or hits certain thresholds, he can get a bigger deal next offseason. He's got time. He's got a lot of years left on his deal. He's still in his mid-20s. So my guess is he bets on himself, as Book always tends to do, and gets paid a lot. He's the Suns guy. I think he'll be the leading scorer in franchise history, and as long as he keeps producing, which I know he will, they'll keep paying him.
Listen, like I said, this gentleman knows exactly what he's doing. The 3 guys that he just drafted, listen, they're greats already, and they led a team to the NBA Finals. My man Ryan. Keeping things moving. A number of notable free agent guards on your screen. You see Powell. You see Reggie Jackson, Fournier, Tim Hardaway Jr., Derrick Rose. A number of players that will be either unrestricted or restricted. Ryan, I'm looking at Derrick Rose right now. Where do we think he is going to land?
Well, it's interesting, Ro. There are some rumors that he may re-sign in Chicago. Chris Haynes earlier in the show mentioned the interest in Lonzo Ball. Would they want or be able to afford both those guys? Could they do a sign and trade for Ball and then sign Rose, who you know his history with the franchise? Would he return back to Chicago? But he was terrific in New York. One of the amazing things about it, Ro, is he's only 33 years old still. He gave the Knicks a big boost after the midseason trade, averaged 19, 5, and 4 in the playoff series versus Atlanta.
Was huge coming in for the Knicks midseason. Then we look at Victor Oladipo. Man, tough break for him. Turns down multiple extensions, and now he's a free agent coming off these injuries.
Really tough. This is the tough part of the business, Ro. He turned down extensions from the Indiana Pacers. That was in the 3-year, $80 million range. That was part of the reason the Pacers traded him to the Houston Rockets. When he was in Houston, they offered him an extension in the 2-year, $45 million range. He turned that down as well. He got traded to Miami. It was a good deal for the Heat at the time, but then he got injured again. His quad tendon is injured again, Ro. So it's never good to hit free agency when you're injured. We'll see what kind of value Miami puts on him. As we mentioned, they have a lot of moving parts. Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, maybe Andre Iguodala and Goran Dragic if they decline their options. So a lot going on in Miami, and unfortunately for Oladipo, he got hurt at the wrong time. So I wonder, Ro, if the market isn't great for him, does he just sign a 1-year deal for as much money as he can get and then try to get healthy and hit free agency again next offseason?
Definitely want to see him back healthy, but let's stay in South Florida. Duncan Robinson, sharpshooter, already top 5 in the Miami Heat's all-time three-pointers made list. What happens with him? Does he stay or does he go?
It's a good question. He's a restricted free agent, an elite shooter. A season ago, he was setting records for efficiency and volume. He shot 46% from 3 2 years ago. This past year, he made 41%. He's never gotten paid, Ro. He's been on a 3-year minimum contract. So Miami has a lot going on. As we know, in South Beach, Pat Riley and Andy Ellisberg are always big game hunting. So does that mean they have to move on from Robinson, or do they re-sign him? I think he's a key piece for them. They've gotten a lot of trade offers that they've rejected for Duncan Robinson. I expect him to be back in a Heat uniform, but he's not going to be a minimum player anymore, Ro. He's been too productive for that.
Yes, indeed. One of those core players in the Heat culture. Taking it to the front court, he won a championship this past season. He's the People's Champ, declining that $3.8 million option. We start with Bobby Portis. He definitely could come back. We don't know if there's enough money to go around for him in Milwaukee. Where could he end up?
That's the problem, the money, Ro, the finances. He's a non-bird free agent, so the Bucks can only pay him $4.3 million because he declined an option. So I think he's going to price himself out of that market. He had an excellent playoffs and finals. He was huge in Game 6 when the Bucks clinched their first championship in 50 years. Bobby Portis is only 26 years old, Ro, so he's not like one of these veteran guys who's made a ton of money. I think he wants to get paid as much as he'd love to re-sign in Milwaukee. I don't see a good way for them to do that while keeping the core of their team intact.
We know that shooting is a premium in this league, and Dougie McBuckets, he can get buckets, shooting 38% from 3. What's in his future?
He's an elite shooter, and that's the most valuable skill to have in today's NBA, especially if you want to get paid. Elite shooting with the volume and efficiency. McDermott can shoot off the catch. He can shoot off the move. He's the kind of guy who fits in with every team. He's coming off a $7.3 million contract. We'll see if he can get north of that, either with cap space or an exception. He has some limitations defensively as a player, Rowe, but the guy can get buckets, and you have to account for him when he's on the court.
You definitely do have to account for him. Go to Chicago, Lauri Markkanen had so much potential coming in, didn't necessarily meet the potential in some people's eyes. What's in his future?
This is a very interesting one. He's a restricted free agent right now, but if the Bulls want to get aggressive, especially in the backcourt, we've talked about Lonzo Ball, we just talked about Derrick Rose, they may have to withdraw the qualifying offer, which would make Markkanen an unrestricted free agent. One team that we haven't talked about with a lot of cap space that I think would be a great fit is the San Antonio Spurs. They have a lot of backcourt talent. They added to it with Josh Primo on draft night. They have a big hole in the front court row. I don't know if they want to play the offer sheet game in San Antonio, but if Markkanen's unrestricted, I think he'd be a great fit for the Spurs.
Could be. We know Pop likes to bring in those foreign guys that can shoot and do their thing from the three-point line. Let's look at the centers right now. I want to start with Andre Drummond. We know that everything was centered around him during the trade deadline and the buyout market last season. He goes to Los Angeles. It doesn't necessarily work out the way he wanted it to. Who's in the market for him as a free agent?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, teams that need centers, the Sacramento Kings, we have the graphic there with Richaun Holmes. The Cleveland Cavaliers, it didn't go great. I don't think he's going back there. So that's a challenge. If he's not a great fit in L.A., does he want to re-sign there? But keep in mind, the Lakers' position has changed a little bit. Montrezl Harrell is gone. They still have Marc Gasol on the roster. They're saying they're going to play Anthony Davis more at the center spot this year. So it didn't seem like a great fit for Drummond in Cleveland or L.A., and I'll be very interested to see where he ends up. A great rebounder, but has some limitations as far as the floor spacing and his offensive ability.
I also look at someone like Richaun Holmes, who has plenty of talent, obviously plays in Sacramento, not necessarily on everyone's radar, but definitely could be a contributor to a contender perhaps.
Yeah, Richaun Holmes is bouncy and athletic. I think he's a great fit for the Kings, especially with De'Aaron Fox. When they get out in transition and run, Holmes can run as well as any big man in the league. He's a lob threat. He can protect the rim. And when you look at the advanced numbers, Roe, the Kings were a lot better last year when Richaun Holmes was in the lineup and when he was on the court than they were when he was injured or on the bench.
Indeed, definitely brings value. And just as a note, we have reports that Serge Ibaka will be opting in and staying with the L.A. Clippers, so he will not be a free agent. And I look at someone like Enes Kanter. We've seen that he was able to come in for Portland, definitely put up those big numbers. He had that 20 rebound. He can do it all. We know that he has some challenges when it comes to the defensive side, but he can definitely put the ball in the hole. Where is his future?
Well, that's the challenge. And to some extent, it's what we talked about with Drummond. The bigs who are elite rebounders, but maybe not great rim protectors, don't move their feet as well in the perimeter. Teams aren't paying up for those guys at the moment. We know what they can do on the boards. Drummond, it's on both ends. Kanter, offensively in particular, he's a bull on the offensive glass. So he does have some value, but I don't think these are first-wave free agent guys, Roe. Usually free agency starts at the top of the list with Kawhi Leonard, Chris Paul, and those guys. I think some of these bigs, like Kanter and Drummond, may have to wait a little while to...
Right back in here, Studio B, free agent fever. Roe and Ryan breaking all things down. Listen, there's two ways you can operate as a team in the NBA, and we talked about this off cam. You can operate over the cap or under the cap. Now, there are plenty of teams that have cap space. Let's take a look at them right now. There are 8 teams on your screen. Let's go through a couple of these if you don't mind. Let's start with these Knicks right here. $52 million in cap space coming this offseason. What are the Knicks going to do with this cap space?
That's what the other 29 teams are trying to figure out, Roe, and they're a little worried about it. The team in Manhattan, in the biggest market in the country, has the most money. The Knicks haven't been in this position for a long time, so a number of different ways they could go. They obviously have a lot of needs, starting in the backcourt. Do they go after a Chris Paul or a Kyle Lowry? If they can't get one of those guys, do they pivot and go for Spencer Dinwiddie, try to bring him across the river from Brooklyn? We haven't talked about Dinwiddie. He only played 3 games last year, but he's still in his prime. If he's healthy, he could be a big help for the Knicks. Or do they look front court and be aggressive with an offer sheet with the John Collins, Lauri Markkanen? The Knicks need a lot of talent. I think backcourt is more likely. That's why I'm trying to figure out if they're going to pursue Lowry or CP, or if they just go right to Dinwiddie, Lonzo Ball, somebody like that. They have a big gap in the backcourt, and they also have a key free agent in Derrick Rose, who, as we discussed earlier, played well, and I imagine they'd like to bring back as well.
Indeed, Leon Rose and Worldwide West, they've done a great job turning that franchise around. Going to Dallas, we know that they're trying to turn things around as well. Obviously, I have Luka there, who is an all-world, possibly an MVP contender. However, you have to put pieces around him. Dallas has plenty of cap space.
They do. The key decision for Dallas, the key player to watch there is Tim Hardaway Jr. It was described as the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Well, Tim Hardaway Jr.'s outplayed Porzingis in a Dallas Mavericks uniform. He's an excellent shooter. So is there a way for them to get creative and re-sign Hardaway, but then also create enough cap space to get another guy, especially a point guard, a secondary ball handler, Kyle Lowry, Lonzo Ball, the guys we've discussed tonight? That's something that's interesting. They also have a decision to make over the next couple days on Willie Cauley-Stein. He has a $4.1 million team option. He's a good value at that number, but if they decline it, Ro, it means they think they have something in free agency. Maybe they try to be aggressive and re-sign Hardaway, and then also add another ball handler to help Luka in the backcourt.
$34 million to play with. Now, let's stay in Texas and talk about these Spurs. They have, $48 million in cap space. Plenty of money to work with to potentially lure some players into that program.
The biggest question for me with San Antonio, who hasn't been in this position for a while, is do they turn the page? Do they finally move on from their aging veterans? Guys like DeMar DeRozan, Patty Mills, who's playing so well right now for Australia, Rudy Gay. They tried to rebuild and keep some veteran presence, Ro, but for a team that tied the NBA record for most consecutive playoff appearances, they haven't been in the playoff the last couple seasons. So do they lean into the full-blown youth movement, or do they continue to add veterans to help their young guys? My guess is it's a balance, but again, keep an eye on Lauri Markkanen, especially if the Bulls make him unrestricted. I think he'd be a great fit playing for Greg Popovich.
Can I throw you a quick curveball? Now, we didn't talk about this, but we talk about the Spurs, but let's go to Charlotte real quick. I just want to discuss them because they have plenty of cap space. Borrego's over there from the Spurs organization. Which direction to this young Charlotte Hornets team do they need to go with this cap space?
Well, they have a little bit less cap space now, Ro, because they agreed on the deal with Detroit to bring in Mason Plumlee. So that was the team I was looking at, potentially pursuing Jared Allen. They need a center. Allen's a restricted free agent. They were right around 17.